between handstanding and handstand pressing. I get a lot of questions about this because I have a book called Handstand and a book called Handstand Pressing, and people are curious which one they should do first. The majority of people learn to handstand by kicking, jumping, hopping, maybe stepping up on something like a chair or even using the wall, and that's a great way to learn. Handstand pressing refers to the idea of slowly floating the feet off the floor, generally from a very folded or compressed position of the hips, whether that's a straddle press, a half press, an L press, a pike press, tuck press. There's a lot of different kinds of pressing. In general, pressing to handstand is more complex. There's a lot going on there, and for most people is achieved after learning to kick, hop, jump, step up to handstand using some kind of prop. Not everyone, right? Because everyone's different, and we have met a few people, especially touring and doing those inversion workshops, where they will learn to handstand by handstand pressing. One great thing about handstand pressing is because it is this slow controlled motion, you may actually find that it's easier to maintain balance versus something like jumping. That being said, there's a lot of things going on in handstand pressing. And if you feel like you're really far from that idea of handstand pressing or floating the feet off the floor, know that working on some drills for pressing can help your inversion practice in general, but also just help the majority of your movement practice. A lot of the things that are involved in pressing, such as deep compression of the hip, finding those inner abdominals or the TVA, really firm push, protraction through the shoulders, a little bit of overhead flexion, great grip of the fingertips, learning to trust our fingers, because a lot of us slam the heels of our hands into the floor when we're jumping or hopping to handstand. That's going to stop us from getting our hips up. And so when we press, we really have to learn to shift the weight into the fingertips. So what's involved in a handstand press? Again, I just told you we're going to have really deep flexion of the hip. And I'm wearing some heavy boots today, which is going to give me a leg up because I have a little bit of height to get my hips higher than my shoulders, but it's also going to add some weight, so it'll even itself out. You don't have to do that in your practice. It's totally up to you. Now, there's going to be some hamstrings limitations for a lot of people when it comes to pressing. Does that mean that you can't press if your hamstrings are tight? No, it just might mean you need to adapt a little bit. So for me, I like to bend my knees. Again, this is not about a hamstring stretch. It's about the compression of the hip. So when I'm first starting to warm up for pressing, I may even take this into something more like a chair pose so that I can think about dragging my sternum past my knees. And then I'm going to keep the connection of my low belly to my thighs even as I work my legs towards straight. If that means they don't straighten at all or even a lot, not a problem. I want to avoid something like this, straightening my legs and seeing how my low belly comes far away from my thighs. I want to keep that connection. You're also going to have a very firm pressure of the whole surface of the hand, but especially the fingertips, into the floor. Fingertips have to claw as your weight shifts forward. Because what happens in a press is we need the hips to stack over the shoulders and maybe even slightly past the shoulders. This is very challenging for people, and it also feels like you're going to topple or fall. In order to stop yourself from toppling or falling, you need to use the strength of your fingertips clawing into the floor or into the mat. Also, what tends to happen a lot in a handstand press is the shoulders come really far forward past the wrist, really far forward, which again makes you feel like you're going to fall or roll. Part of that is going to be limited overhead flexion of the shoulder, and there's not necessarily anything innately wrong with the shoulders coming past the wrist. It can put more strain on the wrists because as we lean forward, that angle gets pretty small, and our wrists are going to be really heavily in extension there. So in order to limit the amount that the shoulders come forward, we again squeeze back with the fingers. It's like we're trying to make a fist through the floor, but the floor is in the way. So yes, the wrists are going to be in that extended position, but the fingers are clawing, pushing into the floor so that the shoulders can come back and keep you from toppling over. So essentially, a press is just leaning so much into the fingertips. At the same time, pushing your hands down into the floor while the hips stay lifted, that at some point the feet get light enough to float off the floor. Maybe, right? That's the hope. And it can take a lot of time for a lot of people. This is not necessarily an easy move. I will say that anatomy does come into play a bit. If you have really long legs and still have fairly open hamstrings, when you fold over, your hips will be higher already, say, than someone with shorter legs and longer arms. This can make some difference. Maybe not a ton, depending on who you are, but it can. Also, it means that if we're starting to learn to press, even if we're doing something like a straddle press, this may not be the best starting position. My hips are fairly low here, which means I'm going to have to do a lot of work to get them up over my shoulders. If I bring my feet closer together, even though my feet are together, that doesn't mean I have to do a pike press. I can widen my feet out as I start to lift off the floor. But my hips, notice here, are much higher than they were before. So, coming again from the side, a great way to build up to these presses is something that we call Uttanasana or forward fold leans. And this is just the idea of getting some weight into the fingertips, finding that protraction or that puffing up at the back of the heart, keeping the connection of the thighs to the low belly, and learning to trust your hands, right? Push down, get the hips up. Push down, get the hips up. Maybe on an exhale, right? Because the exhale is going to allow you to get more contraction. So, sorry I've been chatting a lot, but there's a lot to say about this. We could go on and on and on. Again, I like to take this more from a little bit of chair pose position. Send the hips back, drag the sternum forward, find that deep compression of the hip and that connection of the thighs to the low belly. Hands plant, shoulder distance apart, perhaps slightly turned out. Active hands, no dead fishy hands here. Squeeze the floor with your fingers like you're trying to make a fist. Push down through the inner edges of the hands. Notice my legs are still bent, not worried about straightening. So, as I inhale, I'm going to think sternum long and find a little length through my spine. Maybe my palms peel off the floor, not important. As I exhale, the hands plant firmly. I come high up on the toes, even if my legs are still bent. Get really puffy through the back of the heart. Lower my gaze slightly so my eyes are right between my fingertips and shift forward until I feel the weight in my fingertips. You can see my fingernails turning white. I'm high up on my toes. And slowly lower the heels. You can inhale, find a little length, maybe even let the thighs come away from the low belly. And then exhale, go right back in. Shift the weight forward, get the compression of the hip. Push the ground down and away. What would this look like with more bent legs? Just like this. And release. So every inhale, I'm finding length through the spine. And every exhale, maybe audible, I'm pushing the ground down, getting puffy between the shoulder blades, not keeping my head out quite this much because that's going to change the shape of my back, but just slightly out so I can see where I'm going, clawing with my fingertips, push the ground away, come up high on the tippy toes, even with bent knees. It may look simple, it may look easy, but that is one of the great prep poses for pressing, but also for inversions in general. It's essentially the setup for the beginning of a press. We're just not worrying so much about taking our feet off the floor after this. So this is an Uttanasana lean or forward fold lean. And again, one more time, chair pose position, find length, drape your low belly down over your thighs, compression at the hip like you have a pencil in here and you don't want to drop it, even if that means keeping the legs nice and bent. Hands shoulder distance slightly turned out. Inhale, find the length. As you exhale, push the hands firmly into the ground. They can be on blocks if you want to. Squeeze your fingertips into the floor or the mat. Come up high on your tippy toes. As you start to get more comfortable with this, you may even curl one heel in, or curl the other heel in, or start to experiment with some other variations of this, like slicing one foot out, or even taking one foot up or one knee up to the sky. Keep the heel close to the sit bone. Push into the ground. Think about coming up high into that other toe and then slice that foot out to the side. Woo! As the hips come over the shoulders and you find a little bit of lightness. And maybe not. It doesn't always have to happen the first try. Most of us aren't lucky enough to have that kind of stuff happen the first try, but you never know. Again, The Uttanasana lean drill is not about floating the feet off the floor. It's about getting some trust into the hands, finding the compression of the hip, really finding the protraction of the shoulder blades and the push down of the hands into the floor. I can show you guys some more press drills another day that help you work into the press by using the negative or slowly lowering from handstand, as well as some props and partner drills, because those can be really helpful for pressing as well. Remember, this is a drill that can add a lot of strength and coordination to your practice, but in general doesn't make you a better yogi, and it certainly doesn't make you a better person. It's just something that we do for fun and to progress our practice. So thanks for joining me today.